Princess Alice of Battenberg was born royal, but lived like a survivor. She was a princess, but her life was nothing like a fairy tale. Deaf from birth, chased by war, locked in a psychiatric clinic, she spent her final years in a nun's robe, not a crown. And yet, she was the mother of Prince Philip, mother-in-law of Queen Elizabeth II, and grandmother of King Charles III. In today's video, I will tell you about the nun princess whose story is impossible to forget. Alice of Battenberg was born at Windsor Castle on February the 25th, 1885. One of Queen Victoria's endless supply of great-grandchildren. Naturally, Victoria was at the birth. She had a real thing for royal babies. Like, if you were being born royal in the 19th century, chances are she was already waiting in the delivery room with tea. But little Alice held a special place in Victoria's heart. Now, we're going to get into a bit of complicated royal family tree stuff, but it's important because Alice's family played a huge role in her life. As I've mentioned in another video, Queen Victoria had a daughter named Alice. Our heroine today was named after her. That Alice died young, and Queen Victoria helped raise her children. Princess Victoria, mother of today's heroine, Alex, who became the last Russian empress, Elizabeth, who also married a Russian prince and was murdered by the Bolsheviks, and Irene. And by the way, take a look at the family noses in those photos. That same strong nose was passed down to Alice herself and to Prince Philip. I don't know about you, but I love spotting little family traits like that. From early childhood, Alice faced a serious challenge. She was born deaf. At first, her parents didn't notice. They just thought she was slow to speak and mispronounced words. Doctors eventually diagnosed her with congenital deafness. But her mother never gave up on her, and neither did Alice. She worked tirelessly to read lips and learn how to speak. By the time she was 8, she spoke English, German, and French fluently, even though she had never actually heard them. And later, when life called her to Greece, she learned that too, in silence. As a child, Alice spent quite a bit of time in England and was originally raised in the Anglican faith, which is why that scene in The Crown, where Queen Mary looks at her like she's some random, distant relative at Elizabeth and Philip's wedding, is pure fiction. In reality, Alice had been a bridesmaid at Queen Mary's own wedding when she was just 8 years old, and she stood at the funeral of her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. So, no, she wasn't some mysterious outsider. The royal court knew exactly who she was. By the way, at the wedding, she wasn't dressed as a nun yet. She wore a proper royal outfit. So the Crown took a bit of creative liberty there once again. It was in England at Edward VII's coronation that Alice met her future husband, Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark. Just a year later, in 1903, they married. She converted to Orthodox Christianity and adopted her husband's title, becoming Princess Andrew. As a wedding gift from her Aunt Alex, by then Empress Alexandra of Russia, she received a stunning tiara. And remember that, because the diamonds from this tiara would later be given to her son Philip to make an engagement ring for Elizabeth. That ring carries a whole legacy. The early years of marriage were genuinely happy. Alice fell in love with Greece, proudly calling it my country. Andrew pursued his military career, and Alice focused on family and charity work. Over 12 years of marriage, they had 5 children, 4 daughters, and, in 1921, a long-awaited son, Philip. Alice poured her heart into raising her children, but she was never confined to the role of a royal mother. When the Balkan Wars broke out, she stepped up as a nurse, worked in operating rooms, and tended to the wounded without flinching. Her courage earned her the Royal Red Cross, awarded by King George V himself. The early 20th century was a turbulent time for many royals, and Greece was no exception. One revolution followed another. Anti-monarchy sentiment kept growing, and in 1917, under immense political pressure, Prince Andrew's brother, King Constantine I, was forced to abdicate. The entire royal family had no choice but to go into exile. Just a year later, in revolutionary Russia, both of Alice's aunts, Alexandra and Elizabeth, were brutally killed. The remains of the last Russian imperial family wouldn't be found until 1991. In 1993, Prince Philip would provide his own DNA to help confirm their identities. But the Greek royals were luckier. They survived and even briefly returned to the throne, only to be thrown into war again, this time with Turkey. Andrew, leading troops, was blamed for military failures. He was arrested, tried, and nearly executed, Instead, he was exiled for life. Once again, Alice and her children lost their homeland. In December 1922, the British Navy evacuated them. Prince Philip later recalled leaving Greece as a baby, carried in a makeshift cradle, an orange crate. That image became a symbol of the collapse of their royal life. During these dark times, Alice turned to faith, and Andrew turned to mistresses. For Alice, everything she believed in had collapsed. She began to claim she could heal people and talk to Christ. In 1930, she was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and forcibly committed to a psychiatric clinic. The theme of spiritual searching would stay with her for the rest of her life. In her later years, she even travelled to India, where, according to her own words, she experienced a moment of enlightenment. Do you believe she was truly mad? Or was it simply a convenient way for husbands of that time to get rid of inconvenient wives? Back then, treatments were brutal. Sigmund Freud, after reviewing her case, blamed her visions on sexual frustration and suggested irradiating her ovaries to suppress her libido, basically inducing menopause. That therapy caused permanent damage. Alice insisted she was sane, begged to go home, and tried to escape. But staff and relatives refused to help her. She spent nearly 2 years in the asylum before being transferred and eventually escaping, never to return. While she was locked away, her family fell apart. Andrew moved to the French Riviera with a new lover. Her daughters married German aristocrats and moved to Germany. Little Philip was sent to live with relatives in England, particularly Lord Louis Mountbatten, Alice's brother. Alice vanished from their lives, travelling Europe in secret, cut off from her family except for her mother. I don't know how her children went through all of this, especially Prince Philip being the youngest. It must have been unbearable to have your mother suddenly vanish from your life, locked away in a psychiatric clinic, while your father showed no real interest in you at all. A terrible tragedy brought her back. In November 1937, her third daughter, Princess Cecilia, died in a plane crash along with her husband, their 2 young sons, and her mother-in-law. Cecilia had always been afraid of flying and, out of superstition, would wear black whenever she boarded a plane. This time, there was even more reason to worry. She was 8 months pregnant. She went into labour mid-flight and the pilot attempted an emergency landing. The plane crashed into a factory chimney. Later, among the wreckage, rescuers found the body of a newborn baby. At the funeral, Alice saw her family for the first time in years: Prince Andrew, her daughters, and 16-year-old Philip, who came from England. Having lost her daughter, Alice reconciled with her family and realised she had to go on, for her children and for the sake of serving others. In 1938, she returned to Athens alone, to help the poor. When World War II broke out, Alice volunteered for the Greek Red Cross. She ran soup kitchens, cared for the wounded, and even travelled to neutral Sweden under the pretence of visiting her sister, Crown Princess Louise, to bring back medicine. She opened orphanages and a whole network of aid stations throughout Athens. Her most heroic act was hiding the Jewish Cohen family in her home. The Nazis suspected something and interrogated her several times, but Alice would pretend she couldn't hear, feigning confusion due to her deafness, and replied with nonsensical answers. When Athens was liberated in October 1944, future British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan visited Princess Andrew and described her as living in humble, not to say somewhat squalid conditions. In a letter to her son, she wrote that in the final week before liberation, she had nothing to eat but bread and butter, no meat for months. In December 1944, as street fighting broke out between British forces and Greek partisans, Alice once again showed extraordinary courage. Despite the curfew and gunfire, she personally delivered food to starving children and even to police patrols. British officers warned her she might get caught in the crossfire. She simply smiled and replied, "They tell me that you don't hear the shot that kills you, and in any case, I am deaf." So, why worry about that? That same December, Alice received sad news. Her estranged husband, Prince Andrew, had died of a heart attack in Monte Carlo. They hadn't seen each other since 1939. Now, she was a widow. She sold the last of her family jewels and, in January 1949, used the proceeds to found a Greek Orthodox nursing order, the Christian Sisterhood of Martha and Mary, in Athens. The name and mission directly referenced her Aunt Elizabeth, who had also founded a convent in Russia before being killed by the Bolsheviks. Though Alice never formally took monastic vows, she dressed and lived like a nun. And it was in this modest appearance that she would later attend the coronation of her daughter-in-law, Queen Elizabeth II. Surrounded by diamonds and finery, Alice stood out in her plain habit. Still, even as a nun, she allowed herself small pleasures, smoking and playing cards. By the mid-1960s, political unrest in Greece flared again. At 82 years old, Alice had to flee the country she loved for the third time. She returned to Britain, where she would live out her final years, the very place where she was born. She rarely appeared in public. Unlike in The Crown, there were no interviews. As Hugo Vickers wrote in his biography Alice, Princess Andrew of Greece, by the end of her life, the general public scarcely remembered that she was alive and were largely unaware that she was at Buckingham Palace. On December 5th, 1969, Princess Alice of Battenberg passed away peacefully at the age of 84. In her will, she requested not to be buried in England, but in Jerusalem, next to her beloved aunt Elizabeth. When her daughter complained that it would be too far away for them to visit her grave, Princess Alice jested, "Nonsense, there's a perfectly good bus service." After her death, the world finally learned more about her extraordinary life. For decades, this quiet heroine had remained in the shadows. Only a quarter century later did her name begin to echo at official ceremonies. On October 31st, 1994, two of her surviving children, Prince Philip and Princess Sophia, travelled to Jerusalem for a special event. Alice was honoured as righteous among the nations for saving a Jewish family. Receiving the award for his mother, Prince Philip said, "I suspect that it never occurred to her that her action was in any way special. She was a person with a deep religious faith, and she would have considered it to be a perfectly natural human reaction to fellow beings in distress." And in 2018, her great-grandson Prince William visited her grave in Jerusalem saying, "Her story is a matter of great pride for my whole family." Princess Alice of Battenberg endured the upheavals of fate with remarkable humility and courage. Born among royalty, she experienced exile and hardship. Though deaf, she heard the suffering of others with her heart. Having faced mental illness, she found herself in compassion. In times of horror, she became a saviour to the persecuted. And in old age, she chose a life of simplicity and service, a nun princess whose wisdom and kindness outshone any royal title. The story of Alice of Battenberg is both a tragedy and a triumph, a testament to the power of spirit and faith, even in the darkest times. If, like me, you found yourself wiping away tears while watching this video, don't forget to give it a like. Did Alice's story touch your hearts? If so, leave a few kind words for her in the comments below. See you in the next video.